Good morning. Welcome into a new edition of BWI Live. It's August 21st. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from Blue White Illustrated. Preseason camp is over for the Penn State football team. The Nittany Lions transition into full West Virginia prep today. T. Frank, as we get into a new BWI Live here, the Nittany Lions are 10 days away from their opener at West Virginia. The point spread's down to about 9.5, and we had our chance to do a give a final look at the Penn State football team during preseason camp. And I don't know if we learned a ton new yesterday, at least from the practice viewing portion of the thing. That's where we're going to start, though. But I certainly think before we get into some highlights on that, we learned some good stuff later in the day that we'll get to later in the show. But good morning. How are you? What is new in T. Frank's world?
I'm excited that I'm finally going to get my car fixed today.
There you go.
You know, like nothing to do with football. What's on my mind is after the show, I've got to hurry and get my car over to the mechanic and then get everything situated because I've been driving around looking like I'm terrible at driving for the last 2.5 months because somebody pulled through an intersection in front of me in June. So huge weight off my shoulders, but that has nothing to do with Penn State football. From a football perspective, you know, I always struggle with the concept of it's just 10 minutes of practice because I see things and I don't know if I'm overstating what I see. But what I wrote in my practice notes, so you can check out at bluewhiteillustrated.com last night, we got a fairly representative view of what I think is the two deep at the Penn State offensive line. There's some caveats there. There's some guys that maybe are at positions where, when we'll get into this with Javen Williams, like there's some clear holes on the depth chart, but beyond the obvious, I think we know generally what the offensive line is going to look like this fall. And so to me, that's relevant. You know, it's not earth-shattering information, but it was the first time we got to see that yesterday. And then, you know, there's some other things from practice where we'll get into here in a second, but I think we're starting to ramp up into an area where we can learn a little bit more. Now, polite decorum is I don't talk about the scheme stuff I see, which is really hard. But yeah, we're making that turn towards the regular season where we're seeing a little bit more from Penn State during that open practice period because they only have so much time to practice. They can't hide everything and only do ball security drills for like the 10 to 15 minutes we're there. So, you know, I always struggle with what's relevant, what's just a slice and a sample size, and then what can I extrapolate from based on everything I've seen. But, you know, that's just my cross to bear.
No doubt about it. All right. That intro, of course, means it's time to do a Penn State practice update. Again, the final one of preseason camp. Penn State rolling into West Virginia week today. T. Frank, for anyone watching on YouTube, I'm going to roll the practice highlights, but you spent your time over with the offense. Yeah. And I'm curious what you learned. You mentioned just a second ago about the offensive line, but just in general, your initial impressions before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of what you observed.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I spend all my time just with the offense. So what you're going to see here in the highlights is there isn't anything with the defense, but it's been helpful to track the offense and only watch kind of that side of the ball through camp because there are some things that you have to get through context and the offensive line. Like I mentioned, we got to see some of those pairings and we've seen the way that they work through guard and tackle. So some of those decisions have been pretty evident as far as where guys are lining up and kind of how they're progressing through camp. Javen Williams, the big news is that Javen Williams has been playing guard, I think for a couple of weeks now. He's been getting reps at guard. We'll get into some of this in just a little bit with James Franklin and his comments about flexibility and positions on the offensive line. But Javen was going through as a guard, and he was near the back of the group, so he's just kind of acclimatizing himself to that location and to that general position where he hasn't played that before. But it is something that I think in the long-term view is going to be good for him, even all the way back when he committed. We had Ross Tucker on the show. Ross Tucker, friend of the podcast. He's also a mentor of sorts to Javen Williams, who helped him through the recruiting process. And he said to me at that point, what you're seeing is a guard in the NFL. Javen Williams, the way he moves, his body type, all those things, that is a great guard prospect. So it's a long-term play. I think he can still play tackle at Penn State eventually if they don't have guys that can replace him in that particular position with some of the younger players. But generally, that flexibility and versatility is something we saw on the offensive line. And then as you see here, the quarterbacks, Greg, they finally threw the football to the receivers in front of us. So we got to see Drew Allar throw to Trey Wallace. We got to see them air the ball out and throw more than 4 yards down the field. Still a lot of short game stuff. Still a lot of some of those aspects of the football game where they're trying to work on a particular style of football, but this is an offense that has explosive plays and deep passing in it. So those were the main observations, was finally seeing the quarterbacks. Ethan Grunkmeyer and Drew Allar were paired together, and Bo Pribula was paired, I think, with Jack Lambert. And for people that are wondering, the way that they do it, if they have a competition, like an actual competition, they'll put the 2 with the 3, but they'll usually have, with the quarterbacks, the 1 with the 3 and the 2 with the 4. So there's no, I wouldn't say right now there's any sort of like, oh, Ethan Grunkmeyer has passed Bo Pribula. But that being said, Ethan Grunkmeyer has significant buzz in camp and has always looked good, but looked good yesterday. So some of those deep balls that they were throwing, I thought both he and Allar looked sharp on those. So those are the main takeaways I had from the offense. You got a chance to see the offense and the defense. So do you want to jump in with what you thought of the defense? And if you got any follow-ups on the offense, we can get to that too.
Yeah, so offense, I didn't get to see a ton of the offense yesterday, but from what I did see, number one observation, of course, was, as you said, the receivers were out running around. James Franklin, we'll get into that in a little bit, but very complimentary, again, of where that group, and especially the top of it with Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford is. He mentioned Julian Fleming and Omari Evans as well. Again, the big question to me is just, and James Franklin actually said it, and I appreciated it. We'll get into that, too, here in a little bit, but we're at a point now where it's just time to play somebody else, right? And we can talk all we want about what we see and what we hear and things like that. But, Penn State, at some point, you kind of learn what the defensive back's going to do, or the defensive tackle, or the offensive guard. You learn what these guys are going to do after you practice against them for a month straight following practicing against them for spring practice. So at some point, you need to go out and just, go earn it against somebody else. So very interested to see that defensively. We had some chatter over at BWILlustrated.com yesterday talking about how the analysts are involved in practice. And, you see Dan Connor very active with the linebackers. You see some other guys doing the same thing. And, it was a very, I would say, focused practice for the defense. It's not a lot of rah-rah and pomp and circumstance. It's pretty much just getting their work done in a very solid, direct way. We see some portions of practice that are mostly individual drills and guys flying around, working on tackling and things like that and shedding blocks, and that's what they were doing. So I would just say this, I think that, and this was something I wrote yesterday, but I do, over the weekend, I guess it was, but I do think that there's no doubt in my mind this defense is good enough to win. And that does not mean it is going to be, it does not mean it's going to be exactly like last year's, both in how it looks and the final statistics, because they're not guaranteed. No one is ever guaranteed to be that high up in that many statistical categories. Yeah. The good news is you don't have to be that high up in those statistical categories to win football games. So, and on the question for how Dan Connor's fitting in as a coach, he seems like a natural. He's coached before. I think we forget that. It's not at this level, but he came from a coaching background after his playing days ended. So he looks like, as you would expect, I think that he really has the respect of the linebackers, Steve Frank. He had it before he was allowed to have an on-field role, and he certainly has it now. So I think he's fitting in quite well.
Yeah, can you answer this question? Because this is not at all what I had an opinion or an understanding of with Brad Moeller. He says, I saw a video last night of the D-line on the sled. Oh, no, sorry, it was this one. So from video I saw, when they have an actual Sam, I can assume Dom will be the starter, and then the line is not in. Did you get a chance to view any of that stuff of how that works out?
Sure, yeah. So I did see that too. I would just caution that, when they're going through these position drills, guys are Sometimes out of order. Sometimes they're trying to do things to be efficient and not necessarily project to game day or project to the depth chart. Yeah, I do think the answer to that question is when Penn State goes 3 linebackers, it would be DeLuca out there if they don't have a safety out there or another defensive back. So, I do think that's the answer. But when you see those practice clips, sometimes they are just moving guys for efficiency purposes.
And Abdul's not with the linebackers. So if Abdul Carter's not with the linebackers because he's practicing with the defensive ends, that doesn't mean
correct.
Later on he can't be there, and then Tony Rojas also shifts over. Right. I think it's fair to say Dom DeLuca will play Sam when they go to a 3 linebacker package, but I don't think he's the only player that's going to be playing that position. Although Tony Rojas has only played that position for like a month. Maybe 2 months during his freshman spring campaign, and then during the fall he switched over to the will position. So maybe I'm overstating that. Maybe it is just Dom DeLuca, and that will be kind of how they play. But I would have a hard time not seeing Rojas and Carter on the field at the same time. That would be kind of silly not to have those guys on the field together if you can manage that.
Agreed, 100%. Is it time for our ad, T. Frank? Is it ad time or not yet?
No, you nailed it. I was actually just lost in the sauce of the chat because the chat is hot today. But one thing that you should get lost in the sauce with is RogueShop.com. RogueShop.com is a sponsor here of the BWI Live Wednesday show for a long time now, and a sponsor of me having energy for this show at 10 a.m. At this point, you could probably medically diagnose me with something with all the times I've talked about like the things that go on with me when I try to go to sleep. I don't have a diagnosis for it because I don't want to say self-medicate, but I get a lot of help from Rogue Shop because let me put it this way. So last night, get home from practice. I'm on the message board until 9:30, 9:45, trying to clarify some of the things we saw at practice, and some of those conversations are going on a little bit later. So I'm looking at these blue lights, and I'm amped up from all of the, it's go, 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 go for about 4 hours straight heading into when I come home and eat dinner at 9 o'clock. So all of that does not convey a good sleep schedule or good sleep hygiene, as my wife puts it. So last night it felt like I was when you're asleep but you're kind of awake, that twilight you go through. That was me all last night because I forgot to take my Slap Yo Mama gummies from RogueShop.com. I just bite off a little corner of one of those bad boys because they are super strong. And then I fall asleep, guys, and I stay asleep. And there's no maybe I wake up or maybe I kind of need to roll over. No, you are asleep. That's it. You go to sleep, and then you wake up the next day feeling refreshed and feeling ready to go and tackle the day. I swear to God, the only thing that keeps me from insane levels of success is the fact that, sleeping at night. And if that's you, if you aren't getting enough sleep or you have chronic pain or you have some other malady that cannabis and THC can help with, check out RogueShop.com. I'm only speaking from my experience because I know nothing about this beyond that. I'd never taken this recreationally before. I use it for medicinal purposes in my own life and for helping me out, but they know exactly what you can do with all of their products at RogueShop.com, and they have a friendly chat to help you understand what you need, and they'll help you through the process. And it's not a bot, it's an actual person, because this is a small business owned by a husband and wife duo of Mr. Rogue and his wife Shar. So check them out, RogueShop.com. Always appreciate them supporting the show here on BWI Live.
Thank you, T. Frank. Let's get into hearing from James Franklin between the lines. Let's get to it.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
All right, James Franklin speaking with the media for about 14 minutes last night. That's the last time we will hear from him until Monday's news conference. And if you are someone who follows the game week schedule closely, a reminder that his weekly news conferences moved to Mondays late last season. They're going to stay that way. So we'll have complete coverage for you next Monday starting at noon over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as James Franklin holds his West Virginia Week news conference. But T. Frank, before we can preview that, we have to recap what James Franklin talked about last night. And we're going to start along the offensive line. You teased it a bit earlier, and we're going to get into it right now with Javen Williams and the work he has been getting at guard.
Yeah, I think, as you know, we try to create as much position flexibility with the offensive linemen as we possibly can. to be able to solve problems, but also to be able to look at guys at different spots. Javen, we kind of move into guard, and you're not sure how he's going to handle that, and sometimes the lack of space makes him more comfortable. And he's shown signs that I think he can do both. So for us, we're just trying to create as much position flexibility. I think we have more answers right now inside. We want to make sure we have enough answers outside. So JB getting some more reps at tackle, which we think he can do that, has been valuable too.
T. Frank, far and away, the big takeaway for me there was, should you be worried about Penn State's depth at the tackle spots?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that where you wanted to go with that? Because that's where I took it. As soon as it came out of James Franklin's mouth, I thought, well, that's probably not the best news in the world on August 21st. At the same time, I don't think it's the end of the world either.
Yeah, so this is kind of the when I was saying during that whole conversation about Rogue Shop of I was trying to be on the message board and kind of maybe talk people off the ledge. It's because last night, the second player to go through some of the drills that I was noticing was either Jim Fitzgerald or Henry Bomey, who are two run-on players that were at left tackle. Obviously, Javen Williams was playing at guard. They're getting that flexibility. So you don't want to take too much from that because it's going to be a scholarship player that is going to be the backup left tackle. But when he's been soft launching JB Nelson as a right tackle, that doesn't make you feel good about the situation at right tackle because they've already got two guys they have been touting as maybe splitting reps there between Anthony Donko and Nolan Rucci. But are you pulling one of those guys for depth at left tackle? Rucci played exclusively left tackle at Wisconsin. So if Javen isn't doing what you want him to do at left tackle and you're experimenting with moving him to guard, you do have a gap. And how are you filling that? And what's the plan? And do you have something you feel confident about? James Franklin is saying, like, we need to develop some depth at tackle. I think some of the conversation we've had about some of the freshmen stepping up into that void is more a product of circumstance to me, of this freshman looks good as opposed to he looks good, but we definitely don't need him. So, I think that there's some breadcrumbs and there's some smoke there that you don't feel great about the way Javen Williams has played at left tackle so far, and they're looking for maybe some other options to build out that depth. And that was kind of my opinion too, Greg, by the way, not to keep going with this, but James Franklin talked about Javen Williams and his progress during the spring and earning trust from the team to play and to get more significant reps. And is that because they didn't have anybody else during the spring, or did he legitimately take that step? Now he's playing guard. So I feel like these are some, I don't think James Franklin ever lies, but he purports and expresses the future he believes in, that he's optimistic for. It doesn't always come to fruition the same way. So that left tackle position, I think, is something you should be concerned about and looking at heading into the season.
Kevin Payne, thank you very much for the super chat here. If anybody else would like to join us and get your comment right to the air, you can do that. Thank you for supporting Blue White Illustrated on YouTube at bluewhiteillustrated.com. I agree with you. And I think that, they cross-train these guys, so what you see one day may not be what you see the next day in terms of when we go out to practice. But certainly, I have some questions just in general about the depth of the offensive line. And I guess my big takeaway, just from a month into preseason, well, not a month, but whatever it is, 3.5 weeks, I guess. My general takeaway is just that I had questions about the depth coming into camp, and they just haven't been answered. It does not mean that Penn State's offensive line is going to struggle at West Virginia. It's just that if you thought there were going to be answers necessarily about what Penn State's offensive line depth was going to be, if you thought, it was going to be all solved during camp, maybe it has been. But from the outside looking in, and just from what we've seen and what we've heard, I do have a little bit of question marks there. So time will tell. Yeah. Interesting position group. Again, I think we talked about it last week, T. Frank, a little bit, but it's fascinating to me that 3 offensive line starters are being replaced, and it's really not a position group that's talked about a whole lot. And that's That's very interesting considering where Penn State was just a few years ago along the offensive line. But again, that does not mean they're going to go out and struggle at West Virginia. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I had questions coming in, and they exist right now. All right, let's move on to you got one more thought on that, or
just just rehashing the same conversation that I think Andy Kotelnicki's presence and some of the things they can do schematically have been, at least from my perspective, where I've been positive about this group, but it is fair to say that even the guys returning as starters, Drew Shelton, he's not shown an elite performance in the times that he's been on the football field. So questions are fair. You're just hoping that kind of wallpaper over that. And that's kind of been my offseason analysis is they've done it at Kansas with guys who are good, but maybe didn't have the depth or the amount of guys at that level, and they were able to craft an explosive offense. So we'll see. There's just a lot of TBD with that group for sure.
And as we said earlier, it's about going out. We'll have a better feel for this once they play West Virginia. There's no doubt about that. All right, let's move on to our second topic from James Franklin's Tuesday night news conference. Is BWI Sean Fitz first reported on Sunday. Redshirt freshman defender Dakari Nelson moving positions from safety to linebacker here. Midway through camp, that move was made, and sounds like it's going pretty well. Let's hear what James Franklin had to say.
We recruit them and bring them here based on kind of what position they played in high school. But right away, he was like 220 pounds and fighting it. Obviously we need a little bit more depth at linebacker, and you're looking at creative ways to solve problems. We had a conversation with him. He was open to it. And it's really been good for him and us. He's playing physical right now, showing up a lot in practice, making plays. I think he's excited about it. I get it. He's never done it before. You're kind of unsure. But I think his genetics were kind of telling him. And then an opportunity presented itself, and he's moved there. And so far, so good. It's done some really nice things.
Dakari Nelson found himself in a spot, T. Frank, where Penn State is veteran heavy and production heavy at safety with KJ Winston Jr., Jalen Reed, and Zakie Wheatley. And I know they're still trying to figure out that fourth safety, but with the number situation at linebacker, especially if they want to play Abdul Carter primarily at defensive end, which we know he's going to play both, but I don't think it's going to be 50-50. Moving a guy there for a numbers perspective that maybe is blocked to getting to the field, but can play special teams. Obviously, he's going to have a big role on that. Justin Lustig talked pretty extensively about that following James Franklin, that this is a guy that does the things well you need to do to play special teams. I believe the quote he used was, "There's always a place on the field for fast and physical guys." For Nelson, maybe not linebacker as much this year. Special teams, yes, and I think it's a good move for the future. What do you think?
So for the most part, I think that Nate and I covered this yesterday on the show. I find the situation and the way it was phrased of creative solutions to problems you have.
Right.
Did you move Dakari because you were planning on moving him eventually, or did you move him because you were giving him the opportunity to play safety, but we kind of need you to play linebacker? And we were going to we were assuming you'd be a linebacker. This is always the conversation of they allow players to play the position they want to play, and they're not going to force a guy to move, but they are going to bring it up. So this choice, it's always better to do something because you want to do it, not because you have to do it. So I'm not saying that Dakari Nelson was going to play this year at safety, but I don't know that he's going to play this year at linebacker at all, because at 217 pounds, that's a big safety. That is still a tiny linebacker. And remember, if we're saying linebacker, this means he's playing in the box. This is not he's the Sam. He's going to be the lion position, because as we'll get to a little bit later in our Sunday film study, that's a safety. That is a safety position who's going to play specific things. So he needs to put on all that weight that he was trying to put on or trying to keep off during his freshman season. So I think this is not ideal timing specifically for Dakari. And then what does it take to get him to a position where, if there is a massive rash of injuries, I'm not trying to bring that into existence for anybody, But if you're moving him to linebacker and you're saying, like, this is now a linebacker, he's got to learn how to play in the box. He's got to have the physicality. He's got all those things he's got to learn. So this is not a move for right now, even though you need it to solve creative solutions from a numbers perspective. So I don't think it's ideal. I think that that's kind of the way it was described and kind of the subtext. I didn't necessarily think that was a great thing for anybody involved in the short term.
Yeah, no, it does make you wonder. You don't typically change positions this late in the camp unless you have numbers issues that were already an issue and are now even more of one, or you think a guy is just, it's time to start that transition now with an eye towards next year. Either way, I do have some questions about the timing of it.
I could be wrong too. Like as Franklin said, he's flying around being physical. That's a big part of it. Like that's a big part of it. But there's also the mental transition from playing safety, which is you kind of bite around the edges of the offensive tackle box where you're fitting into gaps, and maybe you're a C gap player, you're a force defender, you're somebody who's coming in and run support. You're not having to understand, hey, pre-snap, I have the B gap, but if X happens, then I've got to shift over. Now I have the C gap or the A gap or whatever the offense is doing. The mental load is very different from a run game perspective. So I do think that that's kind of the transition he'll have to go through, and, flying around. And the way James Franklin talked about, like flying around, hitting people, whatever, that's great. But he didn't mention anything about like he picked it up really quickly because he's probably been doing it for a week. Like it's just, there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, short amount of time, and that's why those changes typically aren't made this late in the camp unless there is a absolute necessary reason for it. So time will tell on that front, but I do think that at the very least he's going to have a role on special teams. You're going to see him on the field a lot in 2024 in that capacity at the very least. All right, next up, Penn State is obviously set at running back with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. But one of the things we've talked about quite a bit this offseason is the fact that, unlike in the last couple of years, the number 3 back, and this guy sometimes does not get to play a lot. Sometimes he does, just depends on matchups and everything else that happens in a game. But it was not necessarily clear, even though I think there was a pretty strong suspicion who that guy would be. James Franklin offered the latest insight on that conversation on Tuesday night as well.
Yeah, and I think Corey's worked his way into that discussion. I think Corey's done some really good things. I would say Cam Wallace right now is probably in the lead. But I think it's a battle between all 3 of them, and I think both Quentin and Corey will play this year. We'll see how this whole thing plays out, but I'd say, if we were playing tomorrow, Cam Wallace would probably be our 3rd back.
Just for the sake of clarity, Corey Smith, of course, the class of 2024 signee, who's now with the running backs as well. T. Frank, any surprise in that answer?
No, other than I think the conversation being positive about Corey and him factoring in. He was the last to arrive and is noticeably smaller because he didn't get to go through winter conditioning with the team to, build up that strength. But just seeing him, he's fast. He's got tools. He's a good receiver. There's a lot of things to work with there. So it's overall, it's a very impressive group of running backs, 4 deep and now 5 deep with Corey Smith being factored in. We'll get to that conversation a little bit later in how they're planning on using him and Quentin Martin. But I always like when that happens because his mom watches the show, and when we're in a position where we don't, I never ever want to say anything untruthful just to be positive, but it's good to see all of that happen for Corey, who is, I'm not saying playing catch up because he's actually arriving on campus when freshmen typically arrive on campus, but at the same time, there is that kind of lag of what you expect out of Quentin Martin because he was here in February, but Corey working his way into the conversation is a positive sign for everybody.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think that, again, one of the things we're going to get into in just a little bit is this conversation of freshman eligibility and the old red light, green light, yellow light factor that used to be a big conversation this time of year. The way that conversation needs to be framed is certainly changing, T. Frank, and something we're talking about with 4 subscribers over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
Yeah, and if you want to get in on that conversation, you want to get the details and some of the specifics, even with the Sunday film study, where I was going to play you a clip from the Sunday film study until I remembered, oh, that would get us demonetized on YouTube. So I did put a link to the promo tweet that I put out on social media. You can check out the description of the video and a link to it to see what you're missing. But if you want to subscribe, do it right now. 2 months for $1. Oh, we both hit it at the same time. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1 to get access to premium content. But just that's one aspect of it. It's the thing that we're talking about today. The reporting that we do at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, Nate Bauer, Sean Fitz, Greg Pickel, Ryan Snyder, in all of our different areas of expertise, it's phenomenal. It's the best there is out there. So if you want to get in on the ground level of information, and I don't mean that like, oh, you're going to get in, like there's nothing, you're not buying stock or anything, but it is something where you're going to get all the information if you're at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. All the things you want to know, the questions you might have in the chat, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is the place to go. And by the way, if you want to advertise with us, you can also hit me up. I'm in charge of that. So if you do want to get on the ground level from that perspective, we have an option for you too.
Now's the time to do it. Hit up T. Frank. You know where to find him on social media and at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. T. Frank, I'm going to go off the rundown script here just a little bit. What you just said got me thinking. Stock up or stock down or stock unchanged on Penn State after preseason camp, because that is now in the books.
Yeah, the conversation around the offensive line has me cooling on that a little bit. And it's something we actually wrote about over during Greg and Nate and I all did a roundtable on, different aspects of, predictions that we did and concerns we have coming out of camp. And it's got me nervous. I think the combination of the quarterback and the offensive line does have me a little bit nervous about, I don't know if it's week 1, because I don't think West Virginia has a good pass rush in terms of, hey, this is a dude that's going to be a problem for Penn State. Sean Martin's good, but he's a power player. He doesn't have that, he's not a complete player from that perspective. I do think he's an NFL guy, body type wise and ability. He can be a problem, but they don't have 3 or 4. It's not like they're facing the Penn State defense out there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Right. So that is one area where I'm a little bit concerned long-term for this team. But there's time to, after that first game, there's 3 weeks, 4 weeks for them to find some answers on the offensive line. And Zach does say here in the chat, he said, just subbed with a PSU promo code. Thanks for the reminder. Always going to remind you about that here on the YouTube show.
Thank you, Zach. And yeah, I'm with you. I mean, my stock is pretty much, it would be teetering between unchanged and slightly up. There's been some stuff with Penn State's opponents this year coming out of their respective camps that has been equally unencouraging as some of the stuff Penn State has dealt with. So yeah, that's where I'm at this point. And I will probably very much, almost certainly have a different opinion one way or the other by this time 2 weeks from now after Penn State's first game.
Yeah, for sure.
So a couple other things from Tuesday night's availability. I talked to Denied Dennis Sutton a little bit. Speaking of pass rushers, that's, of course, on Penn State's side of the ball. He told us he has been literally having dreams about this Penn State-West Virginia game, one being a strip sack, one being a scoop and score for a touchdown. Said he's never had that before, but I wanted to bring it up because it is a good reminder that, as you heard James Franklin say earlier, it is a long, long, long preseason camp. There's a lot of work that is involved, both before they get the pads on, after they get the pads on, and these guys are ready to go. I think that was the first, not necessarily the first indication that it was going to be kickoff in just 10 days, but it was one of the realizations that, hey, these guys are at the point where they're starting to visualize not going out there during a camp practice, but going out there on game day, and that's how close we are to the season. So, yeah, the idea of something certainly looks like he'll be ready to go. On special teams, T. Frank, I just wanted to pass this along too. No kicker decision made yet, or at least not one Justin Lustig is ready to share. As we told you last week, Sanders Sahadak and Ryan Barker were kind of leading the way there with Chase Meyer, the Tulsa transfer, outside of that top 2, at least as of this time last week. But Justin Lustig did say, T. Frank, that a decision is coming soon. If I had to handicap it right now, I have to go back to James Franklin's media day comments from early August when he said that if it really comes down to, I'm paraphrasing here, this is not exactly how he put it, but it was the implication. If a tiebreaker is needed, game experience is probably going to be the tiebreaker. And Sanders Sahadak has it. And if it's down to him and Ryan Barker, he's probably going to get the call again and see if he can hang on to this job in a way that he was unable to a year ago.
And the leg strength, I know, is something that they want, right? Like in an ideal situation, you want your highly rated kicker who came out with a lot of fanfare to be the guy that works out because, kind of like any other position, offensive line, quarterback, corner, the guy with the most tools, you're going to want that guy to succeed because he gives you the highest possible ability level. So I think that that's a factor too. It's just kicker's a tough one. It's why I never talk about special teams for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because I think it's a between the ears game for kickers and punters. Technique, it's all important, but it's all like golf, and I don't golf, Greg.
I do, but poorly. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Special teams is tough. If you have a returner like Riley Thompson, you feel pretty good about the punting situation. If you have a returning kickoff specialist like Gabe and Wosu, you feel pretty good about the kickoff situation. But I just have a hard time putting any stock in preseason progress reports of any kind from anybody about placement kickers, because you're right. I just think it is absolutely as much a physical game as it is a mental game. You have to have two people do their jobs perfectly right before the third guy who we're talking about even gets a chance to do his. And then, by the way, if it's not blocked well by some other guys, it may not matter. So I have a hard time getting too far down the road one way or the other, either way, until game day. Let's get into this yellow, red, green conversation that came up last night. As I'm sure many of you know who listen to the show every week, and we appreciate that year-round, or follow us over at BWIillustrated.com. T. Frank, this is typically a time of the preseason where we start to have those conversations of who is the green light true freshman, the guy going to burn a year of eligibility? Who is the yellow light guy who may do so, may not do so? Just kind of depends. And then who are the red, the stoplight guys that are just probably not going to do it under any circumstance, barring an absolute roster availability disaster. It used to be fairly cut and dry, and it's just not anymore. As of course everyone knows, they can play in up to 4 games and still preserve a year of eligibility, and the postseason does not count against those 4 games. Yep. So I think that, certainly it's a worthy question to ask. But I just think at this point, circumstance dictates so much of it. Like, let's use Cooper Cousins as an example, and we'll see if you agree with this. But Cooper Cousins, to me, is like as surefire of a green light guy as you can get. Yeah. Also, if you don't feel like after you get him to 4 games, like, let's just say hypothetically you get to mid-November, he's at 4 games, and you don't see a reason for him to play in the final 2 for whatever reason. Why would you? Why would you use a year of eligibility? Even if he, could become such a good player that he leaves after 3 years. Why would you do it if you didn't feel like you had to? So I think those are the circumstances that could really impact this. What used to be a fairly straightforward conversation just isn't anymore.
Yeah, and those final 2 games, by the way, at Minnesota and home against Maryland. So if you survive the gauntlet in the middle of the season and you're in a position for the postseason, then yes, that's exactly the conversation, because here's another thing. You don't know what the future holds. Cooper Cousins is a runaway freight train right now in terms of his potential, his talent, the excitement around him, but things happen. And everyone's telling me to knock on wood in the chat already, so I won't say things that could happen, but that assurance or that security you have of a buffer with that redshirt year, it's valuable for everyone. And if you can still play, as James Franklin talked about, a significant number of games, let's say Minnesota on the road, they have a tougher time because it's an odd opponent. It's at the end of the season. And so he could get in the end of the game, but maybe it's 10 to 15 snaps. How important are those 10 to 15 snaps for his overall development? Because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about winning that game because Cooper Cousins is in the game in this hypothetical scenario. We're talking about kind of the conversation with Drew Allar. Everyone wanted him to start his freshman year so he'd be ready for 2023. And that, getting him in the game was everyone's priority, and it was criminal that he didn't get more snaps. And like, we're talking about development here. We're not talking about winning and losing of those games. Then against Maryland, kind of the same conversation. Even if it's 30 snaps, if it's half a game, are those 45 total snaps worth burning a red shirt? I see the point both ways, but I also see that you get a lot of time and practice. And you get a lot of practice if you go into the postseason.
That's spot on, T. Frank. And that's another part of the equation. And I'm not saying this at all related to Penn State, but just in general, this conversation across the sport. Some teams are going to find themselves in mid to late October with only the opportunity possibly to play one postseason game. So when you think about Penn State opponents, especially in November, you may see some guys, some of their better young players that maybe didn't play much earlier in the year, but now, hey, guess what? There's only 3 regular season games left. He's only played once. Yeah. We think he's our XYZ of the future. And we're not going anywhere in the postseason. So we're going to play him these last 3 games and then give him that, another opportunity in the postseason bowl game. It does not count against his eligibility. So there's just a lot of things to work through in this conversation. Again, it used to be pretty straightforward. It was one and done. Now with the 4 and just the opportunity to play in the postseason however many times, it has just become a very different conversation. I thought it was worth pointing that out.
Yeah, and if you want to play the clip, there's something on the backside that I want to talk about with James Franklin and some of the conversations here in the chat.
Yes, let me, which one are we looking for, T. Frank?
The redshirt freshman conversation.
Let me find out. Here we go. All right, let's listen to it.
It's changed, right? The 4 games changes things. When you're talking about possibility of playing 9 games this year and still redshirt, I mean, that's dramatic. So if you can be strategic, like I'll give you a perfect example. You use Quentin and Corey really as like one person, right? You play one guy in one game, you play another guy in another game, and you kind of spread that out throughout the season. Those guys are able to play in 4 games each and then all of the postseason and save their eligibility. I think some of them would like to say I'm a green light from an ego standpoint, but until we're forced to make that decision, why not maximize the 4 games?
Have at it.
Yeah, so this is Eggman says this in the chat. He says, is it just me or does Franklin look a lot more confident lately? Just seems like there's more brightness in his demeanor. I also think some of the ways he's phrasing things is also, because I agree, I've noticed a more loose, open, and confident James Franklin going through this training camp because he's talking about, up to 5 games in the postseason. So you're talking about, he keeps referencing 9 games and potentially a long 17-game season.
17, right, yep.
Yeah.
That's the other
so
one, yes.
You're not doing that unless you feel like there is a really strong chance you're getting to the postseason. And maybe it's only 1 game, Greg. It could be a conference championship game. Maybe it's just a postseason berth. But at some point, this team is expecting a meaningful postseason run. And so, yeah, I agree. The conversation and the framing around talking about Corey Smith and Quentin Martin as one person and then having them play in the postseason an unlimited number of games where now each guy is getting 9 games. That's basically a full season for a freshman, but you've got to get to those games. That's not guaranteed. So I agree. I think that there's a different demeanor and confidence from James Franklin for sure.
Yeah, I've seen that too. And I also think that, again, they don't have it's not necessary for them to say it. I think everyone realizes it, that they are the prototype for a 12-team playoff and making a 12-team playoff when you could make the 4. So we spent a lot of time talking about that too. And now they have to go out and earn it. And they have to go out and play, as James Franklin said, in Indianapolis at Big Ten Media days. They have to play their best when the schedule requires it or when the point of a game requires it. So if they do that and they feel confident about being able to do that, they should be just fine to make the playoff, and then we'll see what could happen from there. Last thing from yesterday, and then we'll get into the Sunday film study. T. Frank's camp is over, as we mentioned earlier. That means West Virginia week technically is here. Yeah. And I think that, at this point, there's obviously a couple days to go before we truly are into game week, but it's bonus practice time. It's time to basically rehearse the back end of a game week, which is what Penn State's going to do. And then they'll roll right into things on Sunday. So preseason camp's over. I'm not sure what happened to it, but it's over.
Yeah, right? It went really... Because you also think about this final week as training camp. You think of all of August as training camp, but really it's just 3 weeks and then they can decide whether or not they want training camp to go longer for this final week, right? And everyone gets into game prep because if there's one thing you want as a coach, it's unlimited time to prepare for your opponent. And there's only a few times in the year you have that. Bye weeks, preseason, and then if there's a gap between the postseason and your game, like if you have a bye week in the NFL or if you've got a month before your next opponent in the bowl game season. So you're going to maximize your time to prepare as much as possible. So Penn State ends training camp yesterday and is full steam ahead at making those decisions of practice squad and two deep that they're going to be going through, I guess, today, probably at this point right now.
Right. Yep. Walkthrough this morning on August 21st, practice this afternoon. T. Frank, anything else before we get into the film study you want to hit on from yesterday?
No, I'm actually going to move some things around. So let's get into the film study because I do want to talk about something in the chat and I want to talk about Drew Allar here, but we're going to focus primarily in the film study on the defense.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into that. T. Frank, you broke down former Indiana, current Penn State defensive coordinator Tom Allen with some Indiana tape is where I was going with that over the weekend.
It's hard.
And
that one's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it goes the same way with Andy Kotelnicki to some degree, too. I mean, you can learn a lot by watching what they have done previously, but like the thing I always get hung up on is just that it's no secret there's more talent on this Penn State roster for both of those guys than they ever have before. So some of the things they do, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I always come back to some of the things they do, they are going to do no matter what players they have. But maybe some things they would like to do, they can't do because of the players they have. And there's a little question that, at least at some spots, and on defense, probably all of them, Penn State has more talent than what these guys have worked with at other schools. And that's just a simple fact of the matter, and it could change what we expect them to do in some scenarios simply because they have more options and tools at their disposal.
Yeah, it's funny. Tom Allen, I didn't clip this one, but Tom Allen was I think it was Nate Bauer asked Tom Allen, have you ever had 5 defensive tackles? And he just looked at me, he's like, no. Never. Yeah. And so that changes some things, and that's one of the conversations in the article I wrote on Monday. Again, you can go check it out, bluewhiteillustrated.com. If you subscribe right now, PSU1, 2 months for $1. I won't go through the full spiel, but you can see some of those drastic differences between Manny Diaz and Tom Allen, and also the similarities. But that was one thing that I asked Tom Allen about yesterday when it came to something James Franklin said back on August 8th, where he said, comparing the two coaches and saying, we want to be a little bit more man coverage heavy. Saw it with Manny Diaz, eliminating the easy access throws. I just believe that causes problems for the offense, and I would like to maintain that. And so I asked Tom Allen about this, and we can get into the conversation about the details afterwards. But here's what he had to say about changing the percentages of calling zone concepts and then taking away those easy access throws with man coverage.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be careful with that. And it really kind of depends on, once you're with them and you've got to figure out what our strengths are. And I'm a huge believer in taking away easy access throws without question. When I was, working with the offensive side of the ball as a head coach, that was the first thing we look for, when you're evaluating an opponent, is where are the access throws we're going to be able to take based on their structure that they have. So, and teams that didn't give it to you in that way, it was always more challenging, but at the same time, you also have to have a mixture, I believe, to be able to play a little bit of, several different concepts to be able to allow yourself to be more versatile in that. So to me, it just depends on, the strength of your guys, the quality of your guys up front, and the ability for them to be able to do multiple skill sets of techniques that we want to be able to do in our defense. So we're going to play to our strengths, and we're figuring that out here as we go every single week.
I think it's just... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it just amazes me, Tom Allen's voice, every time I listen to it.
That was good for him. In
pretty
spring,
good for him,
it was terrible. It was awful.
Anyway, go ahead.
I think that there's a great conversation here about two things. First off, it's easier to tweak a defense because everyone runs man coverage. There's different ways to run man coverage, but cover one is cover one is cover one. It's I've got this guy, and I'm going to cover him. Now, you can make some decisions about ways that offenses try to combat that, how you're going to counter that, but cover one is pretty ubiquitous in how you do it. So it's just about, and the way I phrased it was changing the percentages of what you call, but the point of Tom Allen and the point of his defense, and what I'm going to get to here is the next, then they're related, is the necessity born of not having those cover one athletes, not having those corners that can press, and not having those defensive ends that can get there and get home quickly. was the beauty of what he was able to do in that innovative moment of, I've got to create something to cover up for some of these problems from a talent perspective. He created a defense that is fun to watch for me and also horrible for a quarterback to see. So he the reason he says, like, he's protecting what he created in terms of, it's based on zone coverages, it's based on rotations, it's based on putting players in unexpected places from where they start pre-snap. So that cannot leave. You cannot take, if you take that away, you take away what Tom Allen is, and then you're just saying, do what Manny did. And that's not what Penn State should be doing, and that's not, I don't think, what James Franklin is asking. It's about, can you be more aggressive in these coverages, or maybe the way you play your styles of zone coverages to take away those easy access throws? And that is a possibility, and that's what he's trying to do. That's what I think Penn State can do, because Tom Allen also played man coverage. Again, everyone plays it. There's only a certain number of ways you can play man coverage. You can slice the field in more ways, so there's more zone coverages and there's more standard base concepts there, but you've got cover 2 man, you've got cover 1, you've got cover 0. That's about it from a man coverage perspective. And there's some variations in there, sure, and we could go all day about that. So you need to preserve that. And that's where kind of the next thing is, I asked him just straight up, is there some joy in the diabolical nonsense you create on the back end? Because, again, check out the film study, because there's some crazy stuff. I found some really good coverage rotations in that game against Wisconsin, which is a true spread team, where guys are starting in one spot and ending up in an unexpected place based on what you would see traditionally. And it's not gimmicky. That's the other thing that's important, is watching some of these Big 12 defenses, and they're dropping 8, and it's just a mess. I call them spaghetti defenses because it's all over the place. It's just like, it's a mess. There's nothing structural about it. It's just trying to obscure through numbers. Tom Allen's defense doesn't do that. It does other things. So I just asked him, like, how much do you love doing that?
Question. I mean, that's what excites me, watching film and trying to figure those things out. And, there's the balance between doing all those things and what can your guys execute, So a lot of things look great on paper, look good on the board, but you got to be able to execute them, But, yeah, to me, it's all about causing indecision with the guy under center. That's what everything is about, and making him have to pat the ball 1 or 2 extra times, and make him have to question what he's seeing pre-snap, So trying to do a good job of that. That's easier said than done sometimes, but yeah, to me, that's kind of the fun part of being a DC, is just trying to game plan and scheme and trying to figure out a way to get that extra number.
I think 2 things. I think he's going to be very good here. Like I said, I'm not we don't root for Penn State, right? But I root for interesting things. I root for good football. I'm a fan of Tom Allen and what he does. And so I think that he is a guy that isn't necessarily looking for the next step. He's not Manny Diaz looking for another head coaching job. He could be here a while, and I think Penn State could have a very strong defensive culture under him where they kind of build upon what they've done already. So if you're talking about reasons for optimism and the defense playing up to a level like they did last year, I think the things he does are similar to Manny Diaz in terms of, there's some beauty, there's some contact, creativity, some stuff. If you understand like football and what they're doing, there's a lot of, I just get a similar feeling in different ways from the 2 of them of how they go about designing their defenses. And there's that spark of a great defensive play caller from Tom Allen. Even if he wasn't the one calling plays on game day, he was in charge of the scheme and the philosophies behind it.
Yeah, my big takeaway, and I pretty much echo everything you said, so I will just leave that stand as you said it, but I get the same feeling that you just mentioned about Manny Diaz and Tom Allen. I get it about Tom Allen and Andy Kotelnicki.
Yes.
Like, these guys love scheming. They love game planning, and every coach does, and they will all tell you they do. Of course they do. Why would they do this otherwise? But certainly isn't to deal with NIL and the transfer portal. I can promise you that. But it comes through the microphone when these guys talk. Like, they genuinely love it, and I think that's just one thing that, of all the opportunities we've had to talk to them over the last 9 months or whatever it is, they love the process that leads to results. And whether that will lead to desired results for Penn State and for those 2 on both sides of the ball, we'll have to wait and see. But certainly, I don't think you can fault the effort. The effort's there without question. So, T. Frank, you want to talk about Drew Allar. Where do you want to take the last few minutes of the show here as we get into some final thoughts? I know you had the chat question you wanted to get to as well.
Yeah, and they're related. So I was sorry, I was listening to you, but I was trying to find Ryan Sheart's question. It was earlier in the show, and it was something I did want to bring up we planned on bringing up in the rundown, but I figured it kind of fit here because it's more of a scheme thing. So he says, Ryan says, my brother and I were discussing how recently you don't seem as positive about Allar. Is that a bad read on our part? No, it isn't. My concerns are the tackle situation and Allar's struggles under pressure and some of the reads we were getting out of the middle of camp where it didn't seem like any of that was progressing from Allar's part of still kind of in a similar situation of getting pressure and just like the vibes around that were not great, and for more information on that, again, go to bluewhiteillustrated.com. We had all of those recaps, and speaking to people around the program, like it's a work in process. And there's some concern to me about at what point is it just a trait where you're not going to, make significant strides, because everyone always wants the light to come on moment where, suddenly it's better. And I don't know that that's really how that works. So I have some trepidation about that particular aspect of his play. So there is a little bit of, I don't want to put myself out there where I'm so far ahead, like, hey, he's the Drew Allar guy, because I see the problems. I see where fans who are frustrated with Allar have their bone to pick with the way he plays, and I think that they are valid. But I've also been saying all offseason, his processing ability, his mental ability to play football is rare, and when you find it, you believe in it. I still believe in Drew Allar, the quarterback, if he solves the mentality and the pressure issue and some of the stuff between his ears, he's an elite quarterback. But here's the thing, Greg, it doesn't matter if I say it. It matters if people who matter say it. So I asked Andy Kotelnicki yesterday, how rare are his mental abilities and processing and all those things I've described this offseason?
Super hard. That's why NFL quarterbacks get paid like $1 bazillion. You know what I'm saying? And people spend a lot of money even if they haven't been proven that way. You know what I'm saying? And I don't even need to give you a facetious answer, but they're hard. It's rare to find. It's hard to evaluate. People have written a lot of books about evaluating the quarterback position to play at the college level and the next level. And there, as many success stories there are, there's probably 10 quote-unquote misses, however you want to define that. So those characteristics that he has, the fact that you can see them as you're coaching him and you observe his play is exciting.
So one last promotion coming up pretty soon. Landon and I did another collaboration, Landon Tangwell, former Penn State offensive lineman, on Drew Allar and his performance last season. And I go into this stuff at bluewhiteillustrated.com on the film, but I can't show you the all-22 view. I can't show you the coach's view most of the time. Landon is in a different situation from a number of perspectives and can show you the all-22, and we go through some of these plays where Allar is throwing dimes to the backside in between defenders, and it's dropped. And like some of these processing ability to find these guys and fire the ball in there, like he is an elite quarterback in a lot of different ways. He is doing those things. We highlight some red zone plays. We highlight some of his ability to place the ball down the field. But the consistency is a problem. And his play under pressure is a part of the issue. He's not blameless in this category, but he is showing things that fans don't feel, because last year those plays weren't realized because the players around him, whether it was pressure where he had to throw the ball away or drops or things like that, where they didn't come through, and you don't remember, hey, remember that dime he threw to Amari Evans against Ole Miss? You don't, because he dropped the football. So we highlight some of those plays, and I just wanted to first promote that. Len's gonna have it on his YouTube channel, and we're gonna have it at bluewhiteillustrated.com. So check that out, because I think it's relevant before we start the football season to point out some of these things with Allar and his play that you probably don't see just watching the game when the receivers are off screen. You're not looking at where the safeties and all that stuff are.
Well, D. Frank, I certainly look forward to that. You can find that at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Any final thoughts as we come down the home stretch here on the August 21st BWI Live a first day of post preseason camp edition.
So I treat training camp as part of the regular season, but we are officially hitting game week next week. And I just want to say thank you to you, Greg, and to the rest of the people at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, my awesome coworkers who make this show possible. Like, I'm here every day. I'm the host of the show, the executive producer, but I can't do this show without you guys. Your expertise and your knowledge and your willingness to participate in this, which is in some ways not, it's extracurricular. Like, this is part of our jobs, but it's also not the part of the site. Like, you know, the thing that we do that is our primary focus. So I did some studying this offseason, and Blue White Illustrated was not just in our market, but top 5 in similar sized YouTube channels. Within the On3 network, we were top 5 in growth in the offseason, which is super hard. People just check out generally during the offseason, but we grew more than just about anybody in our peer group. And that's because of your help, Greg, and all the guys, and also the people who come here every single day and watch the show when we're live or watch it on replay. So I'm just very grateful, you know, being here in this situation. I don't want to get emotional here on camera, but this is the best job I've ever had. So I'm just happy that we're able to keep doing it and it's successful. So thank you.
Well, appreciate you, T. Frank. Appreciate everyone listening. And we will have more later this week. The BWI Live Recruiting Show coming up with Sean, Ryan, and T. Frank on Thursday. And then before long, it is going to be our first game week show. I know you say you treat the preseason like the regular season, but there'll be something that hits a little bit different, I think, T. Frank, when we get to game week next week and just days away from West Virginia. So that'll do it for today's show. I did want to check one thing in the chat. Somebody asked if there's any off-season wrestling news. We are going to have a new Blue White Illustrated Penn State wrestling show on the site a little bit later this week. T. Frank and I got to collaborate and see the best time to do that. So we will get that on the site for you. And of course, you can follow the latest team intel, Penn State football and recruiting news, and everything else you come to expect from Blue White Illustrated at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. We will catch you next time here on the BWI Live Show.